From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons.
Tonight, time running out for GOP consensus on the Hill.
Have you offered them a new number?
I'm not going to tell you what I've offered. We're negotiating with a number of members, a number of caucuses, and we'll get there.
The state of play in the House with Speaker Johnson trying to referee warring factions of the Republican conference as lawmakers work furiously to find compromise on the tax bill.
The state and local tax deduction still a key sticking point, and we'll speak with a member of the SALT Caucus and Ways and Means Committee, Republican Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis of New York, on what it'll take to reach a deal.
Plus, after several days touring the Mideast with tech and business leaders in tow, we take a look at the investment wins the White House is projecting and key takeaways from President Trump's trip. Treasury Deputy Secretary Michael Faulkender speaks with us.
Plus, it's a landmark case with national implications. The Supreme Court hearing arguments today in the Birthright citizenship case, with the potential not just to set precedent for that issue, but also for judges' jurisdiction. We'll hear how the justices grilled attorneys on both sides. But we begin tonight with the tax battle on Capitol Hill. Blocs within the Republican Party warring with one another and very different priorities depending on what group you're talking about. At the center of this multi-pronged fight, blocking the GOP's $3.8 trillion tax bill. Louisiana Congressman and House Majority Whip Steve Scully saying this after walking out of closed-door meetings a short time ago.
This is always what happens when you have a big bill like this. There's always final details to work out all the way up until the last minute. So we're going to keep working. There's a lot of work left to be done. There's a timeline that we've got to stay on. And so bringing this bill to the floor next week is still on track.
We'll take a look at the SALT deduction and the cap on it at play, specifically when we speak to Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis just moments from now. But first, we want to take a look at where things stand overall with Bloomberg's Megan Scully, who's here with us in our Washington, D.C. studio. So, Megan, obviously, the speaker was still sounding optimistic this morning about the prospect of sending this to the Budget Committee tomorrow, then to the Rules Committee on Monday, full floor vote by the time they leave for the Memorial Day recess. But there's questions this evening as to whether or not this can even get through the Budget Committee.
Tons of questions. Yes, there was a 2-hour meeting this morning in Speaker Johnson's office with various factions where, everybody left that meeting saying we'll continue to talk through the weekend. That seems to be the only thing that was agreed to in that meeting, was that they would continue to talk. Now, tonight, we're hearing that this sort of procedural step that we have all taken for granted for a long time. This bill needs to go to the House Budget Committee, whose job is essentially not to amend it or debate it, but essentially to put it together, all these various portions of the bill, rubber stamp it and move it along so it can get to the floor. We're now hearing that is not certain, that there could be as many as 3 Republican ultraconservatives in that committee who are opposed to it. There's another on paternity leave. Their concerns among the ultraconservatives are that the bill doesn't do anything for deficit reduction. And things like the SALT cap, could only worsen that if that is increased.
Bloomberg's Megan Scully. Megan, thank you for the state of play as we now turn our attention to Capitol Hill and a lawmaker in the middle of this debate. With us now, a member of the SALT Caucus, Republican Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis of New York, serves on the House Ways and Means Committee. Congresswoman, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and Radio. Steve Scalise just mentioned the timeline here, and I wonder if you can bring us up to date on what's happening. This idea of being assembled in the Budget Committee tomorrow, Rules Committee Monday, floor vote before Memorial Day weekend. Is this sliding?
Look, those are the goals, and we'll have to see what happens tomorrow, particularly with the budget. This is new news that there may be enough members in the Budget Committee to not allow for it to pass. So that obviously would mess up the timetable. However, we had a very good meeting in Ways and Means this week. We were able to pass the tax portion of the bill. We were able to extend the Trump tax cuts from 2017. We were able to reinstate things like research and development, bonus depreciation, and other measures that are so important to the business community. opportunity. And in that, we also did triple the SALT deduction for middle-class families while also preserving the corporate SALT for property taxes and income taxes, which was very critical for New York City. And so we feel like we've come together to get this measure out of the House Ways and Means Committee, which was a huge hurdle, as you know. And also the Energy and Commerce Committee passed their portion. And those were the two biggest items in this entire big, beautiful bill. So we'll have to get it through budget next. And I think that we will eventually do that.
Well, and when we consider the Energy and Commerce Committee, that is, of course, where Medicaid cuts were finalized, part of the pay-fors, the spending cuts, if you will, to help offset some of these tax policies. We heard from the Speaker today that if the SALT cap is to be raised higher than $30,000, that you're going to have to find offsets for that. And I wonder, Congresswoman, if your colleagues in the SALT caucus are successful in getting this above $30K, what you're expecting to happen in return.
Well, look, I think there's different options here. I think the idea here is to live within the parameters that we've been given. SALT right now is roughly, it's about $215 billion. We want to stay within that piece. Now, that may mean we need to adjust the dials. Maybe instead of 10 years, it's for a 5-year period. Maybe we have to adjust the income levels. Maybe there's a phase out. You know, there's different things that we can do to still stay more or less within the amount that was provided for the SALT relief. And so we're still working that out. Obviously, we've fought very hard to stop certain cuts to Medicaid, particularly the lowering of the reimbursement rate that New York receives, which is currently 50% federal match. We were able to successfully stop per capita caps also on Medicaid, and so we don't want to budge there. We want to see how we can work within the tax space to find the savings to provide the SALT number that will not only satisfy the SALT caucus members, but as I like to call the other side, the low sodium diet members.
Okay. You know, Congresswoman, we've been talking about SALT with you here on Bloomberg TV and radio for years. And this morning, while speaking at the Economic Club of Washington, we heard from the chair of your Ways and Means Committee, Congressman Jason Smith of Missouri, about the status of this debate and why it's so difficult. Here's what he said.
It's not everything that some of the SALT members want, but I have members of our conference that doesn't even think you should be able to deduct $1, let alone $30,000, but it's a fair and balanced approach.
So with that said, Congresswoman, and I know that you're optimistic here to reach a deal, but if you did not, would you vote no to allow the cap to expire?
Well, in my situation, being a House Ways and Means member, I pushed very diligently to get to a number that would cover my district. And the tripling of the deduction to $30,000 covers 98% of my district. Now, would I have liked a higher number? Sure. You know, but it's not what you want, it's what you need. That's how this works when you're working with so many other people who represent very different districts. And so I'm proud of the work that I did on this committee to get to where we are. If my colleagues and I can get a little more so they also can be covered in their particular districts, because we've got to remember, you know, they're advocating for their districts. What may be good for me in Staten Island and Brooklyn may not necessarily work in Long Island or Westchester, where there's a higher property taxes. And so we got to come to a resolution here, and I think we'll get there. But again, you don't always get what you want, you get what you need.
Sure, but if you don't get a SALT deal, would you vote no?
We're going to get a SALT deal. Well, look, my 30,000's in there, so it'll be in there. That has already been approved by Ways and Means. That's the lowest it can be at this time, and I'm happy with the 30 for my district, but I do also want to support my colleagues who have districts with higher property taxes, and they need a little bit of a better number.
When we consider the timeline here, Congressman, obviously we began this conversation with questions as to whether the actual budget and rules procedural steps may be delayed here. Knowing that you're up against a deadline to raise the debt ceiling that the Treasury Secretary says realistically needs to happen by mid-July, do you see a chance here that House Republicans might have to separate the debt ceiling hike out of reconciliation and work with Democrats to make sure that gets done while you work out all the difficulties on subject matters like this?
Look, absolutely, that could always be a possibility. That's why I'm a member of the Problem Solvers Caucus, which is half Republicans and half Democrats who are centrists that want to come together to solve problems in that type of situation. Hopefully, we can do this with just the Republicans. Let's take advantage of our trifecta and deliver real results that will help working families, American workers, as well as our businesses and children. We have the opportunity here to do so much. Our senior citizens are going to see reduced taxes. We're doubling the child tax credit. We're doubling the standard deduction, increasing it as well, and we're going to be delivering significant results here for all of America. But if we have to negotiate with the Democrats, what happens is, those tax brackets may very well change. They want to see increases on Americans. They do not want to do a lot of the things that we want to see happen, particularly when it comes to senior citizens and children with families. They've voted against a lot of these ideas in the past. And so we have to make sure that we just get this finished. And hopefully the first option here is to try to pass it on our own. But if we have to work with the Democrats, I'm prepared to do that as a member of the Problem Solvers Caucus.
Yeah. Well, I know you had an important family meeting today, House Republicans behind closed doors with the Speaker, Congresswoman. I don't know who was loudest in that meeting, but is the Freedom Caucus what's standing between you and passage of this bill?
No, I think it's a few members from all factions. I mean, people have some outstanding concerns. And again, I understand it. We're all here trying to fight to get the best for our districts. But at some point, we have to say, you know what, we got what we can. And we're gonna do what's in the best interest of the country, and certainly passing this agenda to secure the borders, to ramp domestic energy production, to keep these across-the-board tax cuts that, if they expire, will be a $4 trillion increase on this country. It'll hurt our economy. Think what happens then to the markets if we were to allow this to happen. So it can't expire. We have to do our job, and we need to enhance these tax cuts and deliver on the president's promises, and also our commitment to the American people to put more money in their pocket and root out waste, fraud, and abuse. We can get it done, and we have to, because the consequences, I think, would be dire.
All right, Republican Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis of New York, thank you for joining us live from Capitol Hill. Still ahead, one of the most influential names in finance gives his take on the odds of a recession. We'll speak with Deputy Treasury Secretary Michael Faulkender about that and more. But up next, President Trump's Middle East trip is still underway, and we'll check in with our colleague Bloomberg's Annmarie Horden live in Abu Dhabi. Next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
We have now, I think, substantially over $10 trillion of investment. And now when I add the $1.4 trillion, we easily break that number. So that's investment or investment that we think will soon happen.
President Trump earlier today in Abu Dhabi after the UAE pledged to invest $1.4 trillion in the U.S. over the next decade. The White House says it has secured $200 billion in firm deals during the president's visit there. For the latest, we turn now to Bloomberg's Annmarie Horden, who's live in Abu Dhabi for us at Bloomberg TV and radio and has been traveling with the president. Annmarie, give us the details.
$200 billion in some of these hard, firm deals we heard about the president talk about today. You have Etihad looking at buying 28 Boeing jets, ExxonMobil, Occidental, teaming up in a partnership with the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, ADNOC, and then really the most important, I think, significant plan to come out of today's meeting has to be something we've been talking about really for weeks and teasing out. This idea of building the biggest AI data center outside the United States. The Commerce Secretary released this statement. He signed on to this deal, and standing in between President Trump and Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, the leader of the UAE, is no other than NVIDIA's Jensen Huang. We've been waiting on potentially details that more advanced high-tech chips can come to the UAE. They clearly are going to be securing that if they're going to be building the biggest AI data center outside the U.S. One thing to keep an eye on, guys, the next few weeks and all of this as the details roll out, how much is the UAE and also the likes of Saudi Arabia going to be able to make sure that the technology coming from the United States, those advanced chips, none of that tech gets into the hands of China?
We're lucky to have Bloomberg's Annmarie Horden in Abu Dhabi tonight. Annmarie, thank you so much. We have much more to talk about ahead and what our reporters learned from inside the Supreme Court today as the justices sounded off on a case that could impact birthright citizenship in America. But up next, the pro-business strategy the president employed in the Gulf and what, if any, tangible wins Americans can expect when Deputy Treasury Secretary Michael Faulkender joins us next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I'm going to defer to economists who give it about a 50% chance. I think all these things are probably inflationary a little bit more and slowing down the economy. If there's a recession, I don't know how big it'll be or how long it'll last. Hopefully we'll avoid it, but I wouldn't take it off the table at this point.
This morning on Bloomberg, Jamie Dimon, of course, Chairman, CEO of JP Morgan Chase, discussing whether he believes the U.S. will enter a recession. A new Reuters poll out finding public fear over a recession waning slightly. This month, the poll found 69% of people concerned over a possible recession, down from 76% a month earlier. Still a large majority feeling that fear amid the current trade wars. Joining us right now with a lot more, including today's data, Deputy Treasury Secretary Michael Faulkender. Deputy Secretary, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. As you join us from the North Lawn of the White House, I'd love to just touch on the data out today. Producer prices unexpectedly declining as some companies held off on raising prices amid tariffs. But we also saw growth in retail sales slowing last month to just 0.1%. Factory production declining the first time in 6 months, and confidence among home builders slumping to the lowest since 2023. From your view, are some of the weakness we were seeing in the soft data finally now creeping into the hard data?
So I don't see that softness, no. So when I look at the inflation number that came out and the CPI number, the PPI number you referenced, it looks like that we have got inflation under control. That jobs report that came out a week ago that showed that we had 177,000 jobs created in April seems to suggest there's a lot of demand out there still. We recognize that there is some uncertainty, but you saw over the weekend that the Secretary negotiated a pause in the tariffs with China in order for us to get to strike a final deal that will ease some of the uncertainty that's out there. Your previous segment talked about all the work that we're doing on Capitol Hill to get tax reform finalized, and then all, of course, the deregulatory activities of this administration. What we're doing is setting a foundation for this economy to really take off in the second half of this year as we make all of the necessary changes to address the imbalances that have been growing over time. But we're getting those resolved, and we're really setting ourselves up for a very strong second half of this year.
Well, Mr. Deputy Secretary, as we look at the results we got from Walmart today and the company executives' characterization of the price hikes that could stem from the tariffs that are still in place, this is a direct quote from the CFO, John David Rainey. If you've not already seen it, it will happen in May, referring to price hikes, and then it will become more pronounced. I understand we have seen softness in the backward-looking inflation data. Can you really guarantee there won't be a pickup as we look forward?
Again, as we continue to move more activity onshore, as we continue to provide certainty for taxpayers and for business providers, we expect that things like tax certainty, things like taking the compliance burden off of businesses, things like easing the access to capital for companies, all of those things are disinflationary that are going to more than offset any temporary adjustments that are taking place from these negotiations that are going on internationally. And so, no, we are not seeing, or we are not concerned about there being persistent increases in prices. If anything, again, the data shows that we have got things on the right direction, and that as we provide that certainty, we are going to continue to see strength build. But most importantly, as the president has made his top priority, we are going to see a rebuilding of the industrial base in this country, and that is what truly is going to provide long-term economic power and economic growth opportunities for the American people.
You mentioned the pause in reciprocal tariffs. Michael, I'm curious about the stickier tariffs, the 10% baseline tariffs that appear to be in place indefinitely. Maybe you can tell me otherwise, but if this is going to be a permanent fixture, have you modeled how much money this will bring into the Treasury? How much revenue are we talking about from the 10% baseline tariffs, and will that help to pay to extend the Trump tax cuts?
So what we're doing here at the White House and at Treasury is we are modeling out full implementation of the president's agenda. So it's not the individual pieces. We are looking at what is the overall economic picture going to be as a result of full implementation of the president's policies. And our modeling shows us that after we fully extend the president's tax initiatives that we're working with the House and the Senate on, as we engage in the deregulatory activities we're doing, as we unleash American energy, as we bring down the cost of capital, as we renegotiate these trade agreements all over the world, we are showing that we are not only going to see higher growth rates, but that we're going to see inflation return to the target levels that we had during the first Trump administration. Our view is that if we get back to those sound economic policies that we unleashed during the first Trump administration prior to the pandemic, the economic renaissance that we realized can once again be seen by the American people.
Sir, Secretary Bessent has warned that the X date, when we will no longer be able to fulfill our obligations on U.S. debt, could come in August, and has encouraged Congress to raise the debt ceiling by mid-July. That is part of what's in their tax package that you've referred to a few times now. I do wonder, though, that for the IRS, what receipts for quarterly payments in June will need to look like to ensure we don't hit the X date before then, and assuming the debt ceiling can be raised in time, what that would mean for the Treasury's issuance plans.
Sure. So, as you may know, I'm not only the Deputy Secretary, I am the Acting Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service, and so working very closely on ensuring that we close out the 2025 tax season strong and that we continue doing everything we need to do to see receipts come in. I can tell you that based on the filing season we've had so far, they came in around 5% higher than they were last year. And the money that we get in at the end of April is really the biggest component that contributes towards our forecast of what that X date looks like. And so, as you mentioned, the Secretary sent a letter up to Congress before he left for the Middle East, indicating that we're calling on Congress to increase the debt ceiling before they go on the August recess as part of the reconciliation package. But we're pretty confident, based upon the receipts that came in from primary tax filing season, that we'll know that an August timeframe is the earliest that we need to worry about the X date.
Well, that's really important what you just said, Michael. Then can you tell our listeners and viewers that likely when receipts are counted overall, they'll be up roughly 5% from the year earlier?
So again, based upon the numbers that have come in year to date, so if I compare this time this year to the same time last year, overall the receipts are 5% higher in nominal terms than they were. And so anybody who is saying that all of the work that we're doing to modernize the IRS or all of the things that we're doing to change the tax code with the negotiations that are going on Capitol Hill, that somehow that would have a negative impact on filing season. That is not at all the case. The returns are up about 1%. The dollar value of the receipts are up about 5%.
All right, Deputy Secretary of the Treasury Michael Faulkender joining us from the North Lawn of the White House. Thank you so much. And still ahead, we'll look closer at that massive tax bill we've been discussing when the Tax Foundation's Erica York joins us next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio.
The SALT cap expires at the end of the year and comes back as unlimited in 2026. So those who say that a 20, 40, 40, 80, 50, 100 or whatever cap is a cost have it backwards. Any cap is a savings. Any cap puts money into the pot to fund lower individual rates, lower business rates, the AMT fix, and all the other provisions that are so popular throughout America. Any cap on SALT provides a savings. It isn't a cost.
Republican Congressman Nick Lallota of New York last night here on Balance of Power talking about the SALT cap, one of the main sticking points in getting Republicans' tax package through the budget reconciliation process. And we're going to take a closer look at the details of that tax bill now here on Bloomberg TV and Radio with Erica York, Vice President of Federal Tax Policy at the Tax Foundation. So the suggestion, Erica, that raising the SALT cap actually isn't losing anyone any money because it is a cap where there maybe couldn't be a cap otherwise if these tax cuts were allowed to expire at the end of the year. How does the math actually check out on that? Even going from $30,000 on SALT to $40,000 on SALT, what does that do when you're considering the deficit?
When you're working with a budget deficit target, like the Ways and Means Committee has been assigned to fill in with the tax provisions, if you give a little bit in one place, like a higher SALT cap, that means you have to take a little bit from another place, whether that's rates, whether that's business provisions. So it does make the math harder, even though it is, in the context of the overall package, a revenue raiser to offset the cost of the tax cuts. The smaller you trim your revenue raiser, the smaller you have to trim the other tax cuts that you can provide. And unfortunately, with the package that we've seen pass out of the Ways and Means Committee, too often they make the wrong trade-offs. They make the campaign slogan promises, they make the political trades, and they don't make the trades that are fiscally responsible and pro-growth.
Well, so here we are with $30,000 coming out of the Ways and Means Committee that you just mentioned. And we spoke earlier with Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis, who serves in both the SALT caucus and sits on the Ways and Means Committee. She's happy, but many of her colleagues are not. Speaker Johnson today said if you want a higher cap, we're going to have to dig for further savings. Where would they find it?
That's the question. They've already made compromises on some of the really pro-growth provisions. If you look at 100% bonus expensing, if you look at research and development expensing, those don't get extended permanently. Those get sunset after 5 years. Large motivation for that sunset is to find more revenue in the window to fund other priorities like the SALT cap increase, like the president's campaign promises of no taxes on XYZ. And so the more trades you make like that, the worse the overall structure and effect of the bill gets. Some of the revenue raisers that they've looked at are clawing back the Inflation Reduction Act green energy tax credits. Right now, they have those set to phase out over a long horizon. One way they could raise more revenue is to immediately end all of those credits, but that too comes with its own trade-offs.
Well, and when we consider the sunsetting here, the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget put out a study yesterday that said if you actually didn't have the shorter time span on things like no tax on tips income or overtime, the cost of this tax package wouldn't be $3.8 trillion. It would actually be north of $5 trillion. And knowing, Erica, that the Senate is going to have a chance, assuming the House can get this passed in the first place, to make its mark, and it tends to lean more toward the permanence side of the equation, is there a chance that this ultimate price tag does move materially higher?
I think it could move higher, but I don't see it moving higher on a lot of these campaign slogan tax policies. Hopefully where the Senate places its focus is on these really growth-oriented investment provisions. At Tax Foundation, we just published a new analysis this afternoon looking at what would happen if instead of sunsetting bonus depreciation, R&D expensing, this new provision for structures investment, if you made those permanent, it more than doubles the economic effect of the package, and it only adds about 14% to the cost. So there's a lot of provisions that could be extended permanently that have much higher bang for the buck than some of these poorly structured provisions like no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, and above the line deduction for auto loan interest. So it really comes down to what are lawmakers going to prioritize? Is it going to be real tax reform that boosts growth in a fiscally responsible way? Or is it going to be more of these compromises to appease the president, to appease various groups of lawmakers who are trying to hold out from voting on the bill?
If you didn't have no tax on tips, no tax on overtime coming out of this Ways and Means Committee, what would it allow for raising the SALT cap?
It would get you about $300 billion in savings if you took those out. So that would let you increase the SALT cap by quite a bit. I think the missing piece in the context of SALT is if you do a higher SALT cap and you also do the AMT fix, you're providing a larger tax cut than what existed under pre-TCJA law. So I think we really need a reality check on what should be expected on the SALT cap versus other priorities that are more broad-based, that enhance the tax system for all taxpayers rather than this narrow group of high-income taxpayers in high-tax states that are really receiving outsized attention right now.
Well, and when we consider reality checks, Erica, I'm hoping you can give us one on who actually stands to benefit from the package as it is now, assuming it can get all the way through. I was struck by the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, which put out, based on calculations from the Joint Committee on Taxation, a table which shows for the top 1% of earners, you would make $64,000 more, a 4.3% increase with this tax plan. For the bottom 20%, they would gain just $90 in 2027 in terms of change in after-tax income. That's a gain of just 0.6%. Who does this actually help, Erica?
Across the board, most income groups on average would see a tax cut, but the tax cuts are absolutely larger for those at the top. Part of that is a reflection of just the progressive tax system we have today. Part of that is a reflection of the specific policy choices made here in the bill. In particular, if you look at some of the pay-fors, like clawing back on premium tax credits, tightening rules around other refundable tax credits. Those reduce benefits, particularly for the bottom quintile, and the tax cuts don't make up for as much of that. I think even broader context is important here too. Taxes aren't the only thing that's changing. The president has also on his own imposed a significant tax hike on American taxpayers through tariffs. And if you take the combination of tariffs and the tax package as it is now, many low-income households would not be better off because they benefit very little under the tax package, and then they get hit by the tariffs. So overall, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done on this tax package to make it pro-growth and to make it really deliver tax relief to American taxpayers.
It's good to have you back. Erica York of the Tax Foundation, we thank you. We have some breaking news now for you from the Justice Department. As Bloomberg News reports, the department is now conducting a criminal antitrust probe into how companies responded to mass concert cancellations at the outset of the pandemic in 2020, according to people with knowledge of the matter.
The investigation is focused on whether Live Nation and AEG Presents illegally colluded on refund policies for canceled concerts and dealt with artists to limit losses, according to the people who asked not to be identified discussing the confidential probe. Some of those sources said prosecutors have weighed bringing charges, including against Live Nation and its chief executive officer, Michael Rapino. We'll continue to bring you details of this story as it develops.
Coming up on Balance of Power, how the current markup of the GOP tax bill is dividing Republicans. We'll discuss when we assemble our political panel. But first, the Supreme Court is debating how much power federal judges should have to block controversial White House policies nationwide, with a focus now on President Trump's plan to restrict birthright citizenship. We'll get the latest from Bloomberg's Greg Stohr next on Balance of Power, Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew. Thanks for joining us. The nation's highest court heard arguments in a landmark case today over 3 nationwide injunctions prohibiting Trump administration from proceeding with its executive order that would restrict the longstanding concept of birthright citizenship. The overall tenor of the bench today skeptical, with justices questioning whether the case before them had standing to be heard, whether the administration would follow through on what the justices ultimately decide, and on the merits of what the administration is asking. Here's a bit from the liberal side of the bench as they blasted the case.
In a case like this, the government has no incentive to bring this case to the Supreme Court because it's not really losing anything. It's losing a lot of individual cases which still allow it to enforce its EO against the vast majority of people to whom it applies.
Let's assume, for the purpose of this, that you're wrong about the merits, that the government is not allowed to do this under the Constitution, and yet it seems to me that your argument says we get to keep on doing it until everyone who is potentially harmed by it figures out how to file a lawsuit, hire a lawyer, et cetera. And I don't understand how that is remotely consistent with the rule of law.
Justices Elena Kagan and Ketanji Brown Jackson speaking there earlier. With us now, Bloomberg's Greg Stohr, who covers the Supreme Court for Bloomberg. Greg, we heard from the liberals. What was the tone of the court's conservatives?
Hey, Joe, I would say mixed. So first, important to understand that the court is not considering directly whether this executive order is constitutional. It is only considering whether these three judges who concluded it's probably unconstitutional went too far by blocking it nationwide rather than restricting their orders to the parties in front of them. So as for the court's conservatives, some of them, like Sam Alito, seem sympathetic to the notion of that nationwide injunctions go too far. He talked about an occupational disease among judges to think that they're always right and that they can do whatever they want. But other justices, Brett Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett, Neil Gorsuch, sort of collectively expressed some concern about the practicalities. Justice Kavanaugh talked about the fact that this order would go into effect in just 30 days, talked about potential confusion with hospitals and states, and there was concern that that confusion would last for quite a while before the court could actually decide on the constitutional question.
All right, Bloomberg's Greg Stohr covering the court. Thank you so much. And now we move from the judicial branch to the legislative branch and turn our attention back to Capitol Hill, where Republican Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis of New York joins us live from earlier this hour, discussing one of the major sticking points in the tax bill, part of the budget reconciliation process. Of course, I'm referring to the SALT cap.
The idea here is to live within the parameters that we've been given. SALT right now is roughly, it's about $215 billion. We want to stay within that piece. Now, that may mean we need to adjust the dials. Maybe instead of 10 years, it's for a 5-year period. Maybe we have to adjust the income levels. Maybe there's a phase out. You know, there's different things that we can do to still stay more or less within the amount that was provided for the SALT relief.
And joining us now with their reaction is this evening's political panel. Megan Hayes, former special assistant to President Biden and Democratic strategist, alongside Republican strategist Sarah Chamberlain, president and CEO of the Republican Main Street Partnership. Welcome to you both. Sarah, of course, there is the SALT issue. There is also the spending issue that some conservatives in the House have. All of this we understand to mean, as of this evening, there's a very real chance this can't even get through the procedural step in the Budget Committee tomorrow. What's going on?
There's a chance it's not even going to get to the Budget Committee tomorrow. Wow. It's a mess. There's already a group on the Budget Committee, Republicans. We refer to them as Republicans in name only, though, because they're blocking a lot of Trump's initiatives here. They're saying they're no going in, so they may even pull it. Not sure yet. That decision has not been made, but it doesn't look like it's going to get through the Budget Committee to even get through rules to get to the floor. So it's a mess. And, you know, the members have been working hours and hours on this. They've been trying to come up with good compromises, and to have 4 or 5 people blow this up is a real shame.
So is it the Freedom Caucus that is, in fact, staying in the way? Is it as simple as that?
It is as simple as that.
We obsess over the SALT cap. Past the SALT, Megan, is that what kills this deal?
Yeah, and I also think that, you know, Democrats want Republicans to take this vote. They want to put Republicans on the spot for cutting Medicaid and putting that out there because that makes them vulnerable in the midterms. And that's exactly what Democrats want, to be able to take back the House. So the more that they have, the more that they are out there debating this issue, and the more that they are bringing more attention to the fact that they are going to cut Medicaid and food assistance programs for the working class families in this country, the better that is for Democrats.
Well, and Sarah, you, of course, have from the jump said they're not going to have substantial cuts to Medicaid. There are cuts to Medicaid in this package. Obviously, a lot of the messaging has been focused on able-bodied people in work requirements. But if SALT caucus members get what they want and it's a higher SALT cap, could there be steeper Medicaid cuts that go along with it? You have to come up with the money somewhere, right?
Not there. I mean, a lot of the members of the Republican Main Street Partnership are very concerned about that. They're getting hit in their districts on this right now from the Democrats. They are the vulnerable. We don't want to go in the minority, next cycle. So it's important that we don't cut. Now, having said that, they want to cut illegals off of it. They want to find good spending, good savings by cleaning up the system. And you're right, putting able-bodied people back to work, having them do something. But if you're handicapped and all that, you're not going to lose your Medicaid. I mean, that's just not going to happen. A lot of the members, including the Speaker, have huge Medicaid people in their district that receive Medicaid benefits. So it's just not going to happen. I know it's a great Democratic talking point, but it's just not going to happen in this bill.
If this deal falls apart, what's the strategy for Hakeem Jeffries? Continue to watch from the gallery?
I think that's their only option, right? Like, Democrats don't have a lot of power here. They have to just watch. They have to keep putting pressure on Republicans to not cut Medicaid and food assistance programs.
This would be a messaging bonanza for your party, though.
Absolutely, and I think that Democrats could use a win about now. So I think that they are just sitting back and sort of waiting. I mean, and you're saying that people aren't going to get cut, but an independent, the CBO, which is a nonpartisan operation, said that over 13 million people are going to lose money. That's not just people who are able-bodied. There are actual people who are going to lose access to Medicaid if this takes place.
Well, when we consider the Democrats' position here as they look ahead to 2026, I wonder, Megan, if you view the party as having a difficult problem, not just encountering whatever Republican efforts are ongoing on Capitol Hill, but encountering narratives around, for example, the person who was the leader of the Democratic Party up until January 20th, as new excerpts emerged, reported in The Guardian, from this new book by Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson about the decline of President Biden. A quote from a senior Biden aide says, "We attempted to shield him from his own staff, so many people didn't realize the extent of the decline beginning in 2023. I know your years at the White House did not include 2023, but with this kind of thing out here, do you worry about the implications it has for whether or not people are willing to trust a party who would do something like that, cover something up?
I think the American people have already made up their mind about Joe Biden. I think that Joe Biden removed himself from the ticket, and the American people voted for Donald Trump, and he is the president. So I think where I know it's a fancy talking point that all the Democrats are saying that we need to move forward, but I think that is really what the American people have already done. They do not want to live in the past. They do not want to keep debating this. So whether this book is salacious now, and these facts, obviously, if these things are true, are very damaging and they're very upsetting to someone who worked for him. I just think that the Democrats in the country do not need to keep rehashing this. They already made their decision, and now we have to live with the consequences. But we need to also look forward to 26 and 28.
That would imply, though, that you were not privy to conversations like this when you were in the White House. This was not something that you dealt with. Is this just Washington being Washington? There's a lot of anonymous sources talking here.
I mean, I think that that's troubling as well. There's a lot of anonymous sources. There's also a lot of people who are benefiting off the president staying in office and running for re-election. So I left in the fall of 22, so this wasn't my experience. Yeah. I would venture to guess it probably was not a lot of people's experience. You can't discredit people who are saying this, and you also can't tell the American people to not believe their lying eyes, right? Like, that's not true. Everyone saw him at the debate. He had a bad night, and he removed himself from the ticket, and the Democratic Party paid the consequences. So I think where this is an important book to have, an important moment in history to be out there. I just don't think that the Democratic Party needs to sit here and rehash it. I think it's a very beltway issue to be talking about.
Well, does the Republican Party or the Republican president need to be rehashing this also, Sarah? We've been tracking Trump as he travels through the Middle East, and at every stop, he's taken minutes to talk about how bad a president Joe Biden was instead of the investment deals he's attracting and everything he's trying to do. Why does he keep looking backwards?
Because it is a great talking point for Republicans. I mean, the Democrats really had a gentleman in there that was going senile, and they were trying to hide it. I mean, everybody knows that. The members of Main Street met with him. He didn't recognize them. It was very sad. I mean, it really was sad. So Trump gets the right to talk about that. We get the right to talk about that. Like, why would the Democrats do that? But at the same time, he is cutting some good deals. President Trump is working. He's trying to bring more business into the United States. And I think in the next 60 days, you're going to see the economy really have a strong boost.
It's a real rear-view mirror conversation we're having here. But are we to believe, as we follow this conversation, that Kamala Harris might have won this race if she had 2 years to campaign?
I mean, I don't necessarily believe that. I don't disagree with it either. I don't actually know. I think that we probably would have had a primary, and who knows who would have come out of that as the winner to be the nominee. I do think that inflation was extremely difficult for the Democrats to get over that hump, and the American people felt like the economy was not where they wanted it to be, and that's where I would caution Donald Trump to start speaking about the economy and start taking action there, because I think in 26, people are going to be looking at, am I better off than I was 4 years ago? And if the answer is still no, they will then switch back to another party. Most of the country is very moderate, and that's why we have these swing districts and these swing states that are not decided by that many people at the end of this. And so I think that the economy is the #1 deciding factor in all of these elections, and will be moving forward into 26 and 28.
All right, Megan Hayes and Sarah Chamberlain, our political panel this evening. Thank you so much to you both. And coming up, we'll look ahead to what's on the agenda for the House Budget Committee tomorrow, if there's anything on the agenda at all. Sarah Chamberlain seems to be a little skeptical about that. We'll have more next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I think tomorrow's going to happen no matter what. Any changes could be agreed upon with Speaker Johnson's office or the leadership offices, along with the budget chair and the budget committee. I feel like there's, some consensus coming together here at the end. Everybody has made their case, whether it's the SALT caucus or whether it's those of us on the budget committee making sure we stick to our numbers.
That was Republican Congressman Marlin Stutzman of Indiana on the early edition of Balance of Power, previewing a House Budget Committee markup that is supposed to happen tomorrow to put together the parts of the so-called one big, beautiful bill. And as confident as the congressman sounded in the 1 o'clock Eastern hour, here as we approach 6 o'clock Eastern, it seems like it's a very different story.
Well, when you hear Sarah Chamberlain, who just joined us, suggest that this committee hearing might not happen at all.
Yeah.
And that we're completely off track with the timeline. This is the first of a 1, 2, 3 with rules and a House floor vote next week. If it doesn't happen tomorrow, we could be way off course.
Yeah, and there's, of course, some key names to watch here. Congressman Chip Roy, Ralph Norman, some of the ones making noise, and we'll continue to track them throughout the day.
This will unfold a lot tomorrow, so you'll want to be back with us and check the Washington Edition newsletter on the terminal and online. We'll be back here tomorrow on Balance of Power. This is Bloomberg.